Your resignation is denied. I bought your building.
You what? How?
You can't walk away.
My God.
What would you do if your billionaire boss didn't just reject your resignation, but bought the entire apartment building you lived in before you even made it home? This isn't a petty corporate power play engineered by human resources. This is the precise moment you realize that trying to walk away from a shadow empire only tightens the velvet noose around your neck. Hey everyone, real quick, where are you watching this story from tonight? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're ready for a thrilling ride, tap that like button, share this video, and subscribe so you never miss a chapter. Let's get right back into it. Zuri Adebayo was not a woman built for the background, and she carried her presence like an eviction notice to anyone who underestimated her. Standing at a magnificent, unapologetically lush size 18, her authority was absolute the moment her designer heels struck the marble floor of Riang Global. With a wealth of gorgeous, dark natural curls swept up into an elegant, voluminous high bun, she was the undisputed sovereign of the executive suite. Her wardrobe was an armory of impeccably tailored garments. Today, a crisp olive green button-down blouse that perfectly accentuated her generous bust, tucked into a form-fitting charcoal gray pencil skirt that hugged the breathtaking soft curves of her wide hips and thick thighs. For 3 relentless years, she had been the primary gatekeeper, the structural anchor, and the only human being capable of organizing the chaotic life of the company's brilliant CEO, Kenji Riang. But Riang Global was an architectural illusion. The pristine, glittering skyscraper piercing the downtown Chicago skyline, wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass, served as a flawlessly engineered front for the most powerful syndicate in the Midwest. Zuri was hyper-competent and fiercely analytical, not blind. She had never handled an illegal weapon or watched a body drop, but she understood the numbers. She tracked the millions in untraceable capital vanishing from the logistics ledgers, and she noted the broad-shouldered men with stone-cold eyes who routinely bypassed security to take Kenji's private penthouse elevator. More than the business, she felt the suffocating magnetic aura that clung to Kenji Riang like a second skin. Kenji was an incredibly handsome, sharp-jawed Korean man with flawlessly styled, thick black hair that caught the light of the upper executive floor. He exuded an unyielding authority and lethal elegance that could paralyze a room without him ever raising his baritone voice. Hardened enforcers sweated through bespoke shirts under his casual glance. Everyone feared him. Everyone except Zuri. She was the singular soul who dared to tell him his silk lapels were uneven, or that he was required to eat his lunch before an international operations briefing. She had assumed he tolerated her defiance because her intellect was completely irreplaceable. She was dead wrong. She wasn't an invisible asset to Kenji. She was the only thing in the room he actually saw. The absolute breaking point shattered on a rainy Tuesday in late October. Zuri had been jolted awake at 3 a.m. by a frantic anonymous call from an overseas port associate, demanding she immediately authorize an unrecorded multi-million-dollar wire transfer to clear a sudden federal shipping blockade. The explicit illegality of the command, coupled with the ice-cold, veiled threat laced in the caller's voice, finally snapped her composure. The anxiety she had been swallowing for 3 years boiled over into absolute finality. She was an administrative professional, a master of logic, not a mob accomplice. She wanted a normal life. She wanted to go on ordinary dates without wondering if the man across the table was secretly terrified of her boss. Now, at exactly 9 a.m. on Wednesday morning, Zuri pushed open the heavy mahogany doors to Kenji's sprawling corner office. The vast space smelled of expensive leather, bergamot, and rain lashing against the glass windows. Kenji stood by the high glass, a tumbler of black espresso in his hand, looking out over the city he practically owned. Behind him, 2 intimidating, heavily muscled bodyguards, including his primary enforcer, Hayes, stood like granite monuments in sharp black suits, white shirts, and black ties, anchoring the perimeter. "You're in early, Zuri," Kenji noted. He didn't turn around immediately, his gravelly, low voice sending a traitorous, unwelcome shiver straight down her spine. "I need to speak with you, Mr. Riang," she said, her voice a flawless sheet of ice despite the frantic hammering of her pulse. He turned slowly, his dark, piercing eyes instantly locking onto hers with predatory focus. His gaze swept over her olive-green blouse, lingering for a fraction of a heavy second on the rich, voluptuous curve of her waist before snapping back to her face. "Kenji," he corrected smoothly, the luxury gold watch on his wrist catching the morning light. "I believe I've made it clear that you call me Kenji when we are behind closed doors." "Mr. Riang," Zuri repeated firmly, stepping forward and placing a crisp, heavy white envelope directly onto his massive desk. "This is my formal 2 weeks' notice. I am resigning." An absolute, suffocating silence descended upon the penthouse. The bodyguards in the background didn't blink, but the air pressure in the room plummeted. Kenji didn't even look down at the paper. He simply stared at her, his sharp jaw ticking once, his expression freezing into a mask of dangerous calculation. "Excuse me?" he said softly. That quietness was always the most perilous part. "I'm leaving," Zuri said, crossing her arms defensively over her chest, holding her black leather portfolio tight against her blouse. "The transition files are completely automated. I will spend the next 14 days training my replacement, assuming human resources can locate someone quickly. If not, the manual is self-explanatory." Kenji slowly set his espresso down. He walked around the mahogany barrier with the slow, terrifying grace of a caged panther. He stopped mere inches from her, his towering, powerful frame casting a shadow over her lush body, forcing Zuri to tilt her head back just to maintain eye contact. The sheer heat radiating off him was immense, intoxicating, and dangerous. "Are you unhappy with your compensation?" he asked, his voice dropping to a low, possessive murmur meant only for her ears. "Name the figure. I will quadruple it by noon." "This isn't a negotiation about money, Kenji." "Then who has crossed the line?" he growled, his eyes darkening with a sudden, protective fire. "Give me a name. I will have them permanently removed from this city." The clinical certainty in his tone made Zuri's stomach drop. "No one is bothering me. I cannot exist in this shadow world anymore. The late-night emergencies, the armed scouts in the lobby, the constant secrecy. I want an ordinary job. I want a normal life." Kenji stepped closer, his handsome face so near she could feel the faint, warm brush of his breath against her cheek. "You were never meant for an ordinary life, Zuri. You belong right here, beside me." "I am an employee," she countered, drawing strength from her own defiance. "You can replace a secretary in a day." A volatile, unrecognizable wave of possessiveness flashed through his dark eyes, a dangerous blend of hunger and quiet fury. "I will not accept this resignation." "It isn't a request, Mr. Riang," Zuri said, taking a deliberate step back to break the intoxicating hold he had over her. "It is a notification. 2 weeks, and then I am gone." She turned on her heel, her charcoal pencil skirt swishing as she marched out of the suite, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had done the unthinkable. She had stood her ground against the city's most dangerous man and walked away. For the rest of the day, Kenji remained completely silent. He didn't call her into his office, and he didn't request his schedule. When the clock struck 5 p.m., Zuri packed her things and left the skyscraper, feeling a dizzying mix of absolute triumph and a strange, lingering dread. She honestly believed she had successfully reclaimed her freedom. She had absolutely no idea that her exit had just set a deadly countdown into motion. For 10 agonizing days, the upper executive suites of Riang Global transformed into a suffocating vacuum. Kenji did not unleash his fury, he did not issue threats, and he completely refused to acknowledge Zuri's resignation letter. Instead, he existed as an ice-cold monolith, accepting the replacement candidates brought forward by human resources, only to dismiss them within seconds. Zuri threw herself entirely into her exit strategy, finalizing database architectures and packing the small, sentimental items from her desk. Every evening, she retreated straight to her sanctuary, a spacious pre-war apartment in a charming brick building at 412 West Oak Street. It was her safe haven, the only place where the shadow of the Riang Empire couldn't touch her. That illusion shattered on day 11. Arriving home after her shift, Zuri froze. Taped directly to her apartment door was a pristine, thick, white envelope. It lacked postage. It had been hand-delivered. Inside was a sweeping legal notice from a shell corporation she had never heard of, Apex Holdings, LLC. The terms were catastrophic. Effective immediately, the building had been acquired. All month-to-month leases were subject to review, and the remaining tenants were facing an immediate 300% rent hike or a mandatory 14-day eviction notice due to imminent structural renovations. Panic clawed at her throat. Attempting to locate a secure new apartment in Chicago while simultaneously hunting for a new corporate job was a financial death sentence. But at the bottom of the document, a single bolded sentence turned her blood to ice. To negotiate lease modifications or relocation assistance, tenants must report in person to the Apex Penthouse Suite at 8 p.m. tonight. An exclusive, high-end address in the Gold Coast district was listed. At exactly 7:45 p.m., armed with every housing law she could memorize, Zuri marched up to the address. It wasn't a standard commercial office building. It was a private luxury high-rise. The concierge silently checked her name, swiped an encrypted keycard, and sent the private elevator ascending directly to the penthouse. When the doors parted, Zuri stepped into a sprawling, dimly lit fortress overlooking the black expanse of Lake Michigan. The space was hyper-modern, all dark steel, polished obsidian, and tinted glass, but there were no leasing agents. There were no other tenants. There was only Kenji Ryang, sitting calmly in a leather armchair, a luxury gold watch gleaming on his wrist as he swirled a glass of amber liquid. Zuri stopped dead in her tracks, her leather portfolio suddenly feeling like lead in her hand. "What is this?" she breathed. Kenji took a slow, deliberate sip, his sharp eyes drinking her in, hungry and entirely unapologetic. "Hello, Zuri. Please, sit." You bought my entire apartment building," she said, the horrifying realization washing over her in rapid waves. She connected the dots in a matter of seconds. "You orchestrated a fraudulent eviction just to execute petty revenge because I quit." Kenji stood up, his relaxed posture vanishing instantly as he closed the distance between them in 3 long, predatory strides, his towering frame casting a massive shadow over her lush body. "Petty revenge? You think this is a game, Zuri? You think I care about real estate assets? You're forcing me out onto the street," she yelled, shoving her hands against his solid, unyielding chest, though it was like trying to push a brick wall. "I am leaving your company. You have absolutely no right to control my private life." Kenji reached up, his large, warm hand wrapping firmly around her wrist. Not tight enough to hurt, but absolute iron to hold her in place. "I am not forcing you onto the street. I am forcing you into the only fortified perimeter in this quadrant of the city. Do you honestly believe I bought that property today to punish you?" "Zuri, I bought it to save your damn life." Zuri froze, her anger momentarily derailed by the raw, uncharacteristic intensity in his gravelly baritone. "What are you talking about?" Kenji released her wrist and ran a hand through his dark hair, looking genuinely strained for the first time since she had met him. "The moment you handed in your notice, you stripped yourself of my immediate security detail. You thought you were just quitting a job. You didn't realize that the rival syndicate has been tracking your movements for a month." The implication sent a physical chill down her spine. "Why would they watch me? I'm an administrator." "Because they know you are my singular weakness," Kenji confessed softly, the raw admission hanging heavily between them, irrefutable and absolute. "They know you run my life. They know I trust your mind more than my own blood. Yesterday, my perimeter security caught 2 scouts trying to bypass the locks on your building's service entrance. Your previous landlord had 0 security. Anyone could have walked right up to your door." Zuri stepped back, her legs suddenly trembling under the weight of the revelation. "So you bought the building?" "I bought the entire structure," Kenji said, his eyes fierce with possessive devotion. "I terminated the management, installed ballistic glass on the lower tiers, and placed 4 of my elite enforcers in the lobby, disguised as concierges. The rent hike notice was a calculated legal maneuver to force the other tenants to voluntarily vacate over the next month so my men can secure the entire perimeter. But you aren't paying a single dime. You are staying exactly where you are, and you are returning to your desk on Monday morning. Because if the syndicate realizes you are no longer under my wing, they will snatch you off the pavement just to break me. Zuri's mind spun as she looked at the man who had just rewritten her entire reality overnight. You're insane. You're holding me hostage under the guise of protection. Kenji stepped into her space again, his hand coming up to gently cup her jaw, his thumb brushing tenderly against her cheekbone. The touch was startlingly tender compared to the terrifying reality of his words. I am keeping you breathing, Zuri. You tried to run. I simply removed the exits. Now, sit down. Let's discuss your new contract. Monday morning arrived with the biting chill of a Chicago wind sweeping off Lake Michigan. Zuri Adebayo stepped out of the newly reinforced ballistic glass doors of 412 West Oak Street, her breath pluming in the crisp air. True to Kenji's terrifying, airtight promise, a broad-shouldered man in a flawless tailored suit, who introduced himself as Hayes, was already holding open the door to a sleek, armored black SUV. Her regular morning commute on the crowded L train was officially a relic of the past. When she walked onto the executive floor of Ryan Global, the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. The administrative staff, who usually offered her polite, casual greetings, now practically parted like the Red Sea. They had seen the armored convoy pull up. They had seen Hayes escort her to the private elevator with the deference reserved for royalty. The office rumors were already churning at a fever pitch, but Zuri ignored them. She smoothed the fabric of her custom-tailored burgundy wrap dress, a garment that perfectly hugged her full thighs and accentuated the plush, soft curve of her generous bust and wide hips, and marched straight into Kenji's penthouse office without knocking. He was already at his desk, speaking rapid-fire Korean into an encrypted satellite phone. The moment his eyes landed on her, he hung up without a word of farewell to the person on the other end. His dark, sharp eyes swept over her body, carrying a raw, unadulterated heat that made the breath catch in her throat. The professional veil had been completely incinerated the night he bought her building. "You're 5 minutes late," Kenji noted, though there was no reprimand in his low baritone, only a deep, possessive satisfaction. "My armed escort insisted on taking a 3-block detour to ensure we weren't being tailed," Zuri shot back, dropping her designer portfolio onto her desk in the adjoining annex. "And if we are going to establish my new contract, Kenji, we need to set ground rules. I am your logistical strategist, not your prisoner." Kenji stood, walking slowly toward her desk, before leaning his knuckles on the edge of the dark mahogany. "You are whatever I need you to be to keep you breathing, Zuri. The rival syndicate is escalating. 2 of their top lieutenants were spotted near O'Hare International Airport last night, asking very specific questions about our incoming freight. They are hunting for a vulnerability." Zuri swallowed hard, the brutal reality of the underworld sinking its teeth into her. But Zuri was a woman of logic, numbers, and data. Fear was a useless emotion. Structured action was power. She sat down, booted up her dual monitors, and pulled up the highly encrypted logistics ledgers that only she knew how to navigate. "If they were bold enough to send scouts to my apartment, and now their men are poking around O'Hare, they aren't guessing, Kenji," Zuri said, her fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard with practiced speed. "They have inside information." Kenji's sharp jaw tightened. "My men are loyal. I pay them exceptionally well to guarantee it." "Loyalty can be bought, but fear is cheaper," Zuri countered, spinning her primary monitor around to face him. "Look at this. For the last 3 years, I've managed the scheduling for every inbound maritime shipment. I know the blind spots. I know the exact 15-minute window during the shift changes at the Southside docks where security is completely negligible. Yesterday, while I was supposedly preparing my exit, I ran a deep audit on our operational history." Kenji leaned over her desk to look at the screen, his broad chest brushing against her shoulder. His intoxicating scent of bergamot, expensive leather, and winter air wrapped around her as his eyes absorbed the data. 3 shipments routed through the Southside terminal last month had delayed intake logs, Zuri explained, pointing to the glowing rows of data. Minor anomalies, 10 minutes here, 12 minutes there. Someone on the inside is deliberately holding the gates open just long enough for the rival syndicate to skim your high-value shipments, and they are using that exact same internal clearance to track your personal movements. And mine. Kenji's eyes widened slightly, a lethal, predatory calm washing over his handsome features as he realized what her brilliant analytical mind had just uncovered. "Who authorized these specific gate schedules?" he asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Gregory Thorne," Zuri said, naming the veteran head of operations. "He's been with the company since before you took over the Midwest territory. But according to the offshore bank requests that crossed my desk last week, he recently purchased a multi-million-dollar vacation estate. I thought it was an accounting error for a man on his salary. It isn't." Kenji slowly stood up straight, his face transforming into a mask of pure, unyielding authority. "Gregory." Zuri looked up at him, her heart pounding against her ribs. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to plug the leak permanently," Kenji said softly. He looked down at Zuri, the terrifying aura around him suddenly softening into something devastatingly tender. He reached out, his knuckles brushing lightly, almost reversely against the soft, warm flesh of her cheek. "You tried to quit because you thought you were just a secretary. You just found a rat that my entire counterintelligence division missed for 6 months. You aren't just an employee, Zuri. You are the queen on my board." He withdrew his hand, his eyes burning with a sudden, calculated fire. "Pack your things. We have a dinner reservation tonight at the most exclusive private room in Lincoln Park. Wear something breathtaking." Zuri frowned, confused by the sudden shift. "Why?" "Because if Gregory's rat is watching us, we are going to give him a flawless show," Kenji murmured, a dark smile touching his lips. "We are going to make the entire city believe you are the vulnerable key to bringing my empire down. And then, Zuri, we are going to spring the trap." The private dining room at the elite restaurant in Lincoln Park was a masterpiece of modern luxury, wrapped in dark mahogany panels and illuminated by the soft, golden glow of candlelight. But Zuri couldn't taste a single bite of the intricate cuisine placed before her. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken danger. Tonight, she wore a breathtaking, off-the-shoulder black velvet gown that clung perfectly to every soft, plush roll and gorgeous curve of her size 18 silhouette, leaving her smooth collarbones bare. Kenji had barely taken his eyes off her all evening. His gaze raked over her full bust and the elegant line of her neck with an unvarnished, possessive hunger that he no longer bothered to hide. But this wasn't a romantic getaway. It was a calculated ambush. Kenji had deliberately leaked their itinerary through Gregory's compromised communication channels, ensuring the rival syndicate believed the boss was dining unprotected with his ultimate vulnerability. The strategy was simple: draw the assassins out, intercept them, and secure the definitive proof needed to justify an all-out retaliation to the Underworld Commission. "Breathe, Zuri," Kenji murmured, reaching across the white linen to cover her trembling fingers with his massive, powerful hand. His luxury gold watch caught the ambient candlelight. "My perimeter team has the entire block locked down. Hayes is securing the kitchen entrance. Garrett is already stationed inside as the sommelier. You are completely safe under my watch." "I've spent my entire career managing spreadsheets, Kenji," Zuri whispered fiercely, her hand gripping his tightly. "I type 80 words a minute and build data models. I don't act as bait for syndicate hitmen." Kenji's sharp jaw relaxed slightly, a dark, devastatingly handsome smirk touching his lips. He lifted her hand, pressing a scorching, lingering kiss directly to her knuckles. "You are executing your role flawlessly, and you look absolutely magnificent. You have no structural concept of what it does to a man's focus to see a woman with your striking curves wrapped in velvet, sitting at his table knowing she belongs to him." A deep flush crept up Zuri's neck. "I don't belong to anyone. You merely purchased a real estate deed." Before Kenji could articulate a response, the heavy mahogany door of the private suite clicked open. The air pressure in the room plummeted instantly. It wasn't the waiter returning with the next course. It was a broad-shouldered man wearing the restaurant's uniform, but his posture was entirely wrong. His eyes were dead, robotic, and locked with lethal intent onto Zuri's chest. In one fluid motion, he drew a suppressed handgun from beneath his serving apron. Time seemed to fracture into microseconds. Zuri didn't waste breath screaming. Her brilliant, hyper-competent mind overrode her terror. Relying on sheer adrenaline and the excellent core strength of her thick, powerful legs, she drove her weight backward and kicked the massive oak dining table upward with explosive force. The heavy table flipped over with a deafening crash, shattering crystal wine glasses and sending porcelain plates flying across the room. It formed a thick, solid wooden barricade between them and the assassin just as the weapon discharged. Thwip, thwip. Two high-caliber bullets embedded themselves deep into the underside of the oak table. In the exact same heartbeat, Kenji lunged forward, his heavy, muscular frame tackling Zuri to the carpeted floor. He covered her body completely with his own, shielding her voluptuous frame from any stray shrapnel as his hand flew to his shoulder holster, drawing his black steel weapon. "Garrett!" Kenji roared, his voice a terrifying thunder. The suite doors burst completely open. Automatic gunfire erupted in the outer hallway, loud, sharp, and deafening. Zuri clamped her hands over her ears, burying her face deep into the expensive fabric of Kenji's bespoke suit jacket. The rich scent of bergamot was instantly replaced by the acrid, burning smell of cordite. The exchange lasted a mere 10 seconds, but to Zuri, it felt like an eternity inside the belly of a beast. "Clear!" a booming voice shouted from the threshold. It was Hayes. Kenji didn't move immediately. He remained firmly positioned over Zuri, his breathing ragged as his large hands frantically raked down her arms, her waist and her wide hips, checking every inch of her for blood. "Are you hit? Zuri, look at me. Look into my eyes. Are you hurt?" She forced her eyes open, gasping for oxygen in the smoky room. "I'm intact. I'm okay." Kenji exhaled a long, shaky breath, the terrifying ice in his eyes melting as he pressed his forehead against hers in pure relief. "You just flipped a 300-pound solid oak table." "I have exceptional physical conditioning," she panted, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. Kenji let out a dark, breathless laugh, a sound of pure adoration. He pulled her up off the carpet, keeping one solid arm locked securely around her thick waist, anchoring her to his side. In the ruined hallway, the syndicate hitman lay pinned to the floor, bleeding heavily from a clean shoulder wound inflicted by Garrett. Kenji stepped over the debris, his entire demeanor instantly transforming from a frantic lover back into a merciless king. He looked down at the bleeding assassin with absolute detachment. "You bypassed my outer perimeter because Gregory Thorne gave you the security codes." The hitman spat blood onto the ruined floor, glaring up at them. "The syndicate sends its regards. You can't protect her forever, Ryang." "Tell your superiors," Kenji said, his voice dropping to an absolute sub-zero whisper that made even his own enforcers stiffen, "that my operations director is already dead, and if any member of your organization ever comes within a mile of the woman standing behind me again, I will burn your entire empire to ash and force you to watch the embers. Take him to the secure warehouse." Hayes and Garrett hauled the bleeding man away, leaving the room in total silence. Kenji turned his full attention back to Zuri. She was visibly shaking now, the reality of the lethal violence crashing over her defenses. Yet she didn't faint. She didn't break. She looked at the blood on the floor, looked at the raw power radiating from the Korean billionaire before her, and realized something profound. The normal life she had craved, the ordinary corporate job with an ordinary boss who complained about toner cartridges and quarterly reports, would suffocate her. She didn't want to run anymore. She thrived in the high-stakes calculations. She thrived in the chaos. She thrived with him. Kenji gently framed her face with his warm hands, his dark eyes filled with absolute sincerity. "I am sorry, Zuri. I promised you complete safety, and I let them get too close. If you want to leave Chicago tomorrow, I will understand. I will personally fund your new identity and guarantee your safety anywhere on the globe. Zuri reached up, her manicured hands wrapping firmly over his wrists. If I leave this city, Kenji, who is going to audit your logistics matrix? Who is going to ensure your shadow empire doesn't collapse under its own weight while you're busy fighting a war? Kenji's breath hitched, his chest rising sharply. Zuri, I'm not quitting, Kenji, she whispered fiercely, her eyes locking onto his with absolute finality. But I am never going to be just your secretary again. If I am staying in this world, I am not sitting in the annex. I want a seat at the table, a real one. I want to be your executive partner. Kenji's dark eyes blazed with a fiery, unyielding devotion. He didn't hesitate for a single fraction of a second. He crushed his mouth against hers, kissing her with a desperate, bruising passion that tasted of absolute surrender and dangerous triumph. Zuri kissed him back with equal fervor, wrapping arms around his neck, pulling his solid, powerful body flush against her lush, voluptuous curves. You can have the table, the entire corporation, and every asset I own, Kenji murmured against her lips, his hands sliding down to grip her soft, wide hips with fierce possessiveness. The apartment building was just the down payment, Zuri. You own me. The aftermath of a syndicate ambush was usually handled in absolute silence, but the architectural and corporate transformation at Rion Global over the next 48 hours was loud enough to shake the upper echelons of Chicago's underworld. Zuri Adebayo did not return to the glass-walled annex cubicle on Tuesday morning. Instead, maintenance crews spent the night dismantling the frosted partition between the CEO's primary office and the adjoining suite. By noon, a second massive executive desk, constructed of polished black quartz, sat perfectly perpendicular to Kenji's mahogany fortress. Zuri sat behind it, wearing a stunning, custom-tailored emerald green double-breasted blazer that perfectly accentuated her full bust, paired with matching trousers that hugged the breathtaking curves of her wide hips and thick thighs. Her natural dark curls were still pinned up in her signature sharp high bun, but her focus was entirely locked onto the primary mainframe. She was no longer filtering his calls or managing his schedule. She was actively restructuring the foundational security of his empire. Kenji stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, his black designer suit jacket unbuttoned, his luxury gold watch catching the sharp afternoon sun streaming over the skyline. His dark eyes rarely left her side of the room. The lethal, untouchable aura that usually terrified the executive staff seemed to completely soften whenever Zuri looked up from her monitors to correct a supply chain variable. The Underworld Commission has officially accepted the documentation, Kenji said, his low baritone carrying a deep note of possessive satisfaction. The digital audit you compiled on Gregory Thorne's offshore accounts proved his treason beyond a shadow of a doubt. The rival syndicate has been ordered to pay a massive territorial concession, and Gregory has been permanently retired from our operations. Zuri didn't flinch at the word. She had made her choice, and she stood by it completely. The territorial concession is merely a short-term asset, Kenji. If we don't fix the underlying vulnerability in the Southside shipping manifests, someone else will eventually exploit the exact same blind spot. She spun her secondary monitor toward him, her manicured fingers tapping a confident rhythm against the quartz desk. I've completely rewritten the logistics encryption algorithm. Moving forward, the 15-minute security gaps during shift changes are entirely eliminated. The intake logs are now tied to a dynamic, real-time biometric authorization code that rotates every 60 seconds. Even if another executive tries to sell our schedules, the data will be completely useless by the time it reaches the street. Kenji walked over to her desk, his powerful frame casting a familiar, warm shadow over her. He leaned down, placing his large hands flat on the quartz surface, bringing his handsome face mere inches from hers. The intoxicating, rich scent of bergamot and winter air wrapped around her senses. You just optimized an entire multi-million-dollar distribution network in less than 2 days, Kenji murmured, a rare, devastatingly handsome smile touching his sharp jawline. My specialized counterintelligence division spent 6 months chasing ghosts. and you solved it between your morning coffee. I told you, Zuri said, looking directly into his piercing dark eyes without a single hint of intimidation. I am a woman of logic and numbers. If you give me the data, I will always find the solution. And what about your solution? Kenji asked softly, his voice dropping to a low, possessive murmur meant only for her ears. His hand reached out, his thumb gently brushing against her warm cheekbone, a touch that was startlingly tender compared to the absolute, lethal authority he wielded outside these doors. Do you still look at this room and crave a normal life, Zuri? Zuri leaned into his hand slightly, her heart hammering against her ribs. But this time it wasn't out of terror. It was adrenaline, pure desire, and the intoxicating realization of her own authority. A normal life with an ordinary boss would bore me to tears within a week, Zuri confessed, a confident smile playing on her lips. She reached up, wrapping her fingers tightly around his wrist, feeling the steady, powerful pulse beneath his skin. I don't want to hide in the background anymore. I like the view from the top. Kenji's eyes blazed with an unyielding, fierce devotion. He straightened up, pulling Zuri up from her chair and locking his massive arms securely around her soft, voluptuous waist, pulling her flush against his solid chest. The city belongs to us now, Zuri. You wanted a seat at the table, but you ended up ruling the entire board. We rule it together, she corrected fiercely, before pulling his lips down to meet hers in a passionate, absolute promise of partnership. Thank you so much for journeying through this thrilling world with Zuri and Kenji. Please take a quick moment to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who loves a true cinematic romance. We would love to have you with us for our next story. Until then, take care, and we will see you soon.